What's up everyone, it's Mike here from The Art of Guitar. Today I wanted to make a video, not really a lesson video, but a place for people to tell their story, their journey when it comes to guitar. And I have other videos where people will leave comments sometimes, and I'll see a really long comment, and sometimes it's somebody just telling me their history with guitar, what got them into it, what their goals are, what they were, what they want to do, and all that. And I thought that's really cool that people feel the need to want to share their journey with us. But the problem is it's kind of scattered throughout all comment sections of my videos. So I thought I would make this one video and give a brief history of my guitar playing and how I came to be where I'm at today, and also give people a chance in the comment section to tell their own story. So this will be sort of a one-stop place for all those stories. So I'm kind of excited to see what you guys offer in the comment section. And I do read all of them, by the way, so I'm excited about that. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to give you a brief history, sort of add my contribution to this, but I'm not going to write it out. I'm just going to try to tell it and make it as brief as possible. I tried this earlier today, but it took like 2 hours. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to make this a 2-hour video. I'll do all the long, in-depth type storytelling in other ways, maybe a podcast or something. But today I'll give you a brief overview of what I've done in my life to get to the point where I can do music for a living. So right off the bat, I have to say I'm pretty lucky that my parents used to play records all the time when I was young. I would always hear music. I'd hear Elvis, I'd hear CCR, I would hear Pink Floyd, all these different kinds of bands coming through this gigantic record player we had in the living room. And I remember because back then, record players were like furniture. So you'd open the top, put a record in, it would spin. It was a very visceral experience. So you would feel the entire thing vibrating as it would play. So that kind of already got me interested in the idea of what music was. So in kindergarten, we had a piano, and yeah, I'm going all the way back on this one. And I would start to just mess with it. The teacher would let me play it. And eventually I figured out Mary Had a Little Lamb, and I was doing, things. I don't think the other kids were that interested in the piano, but I was. And I would just try to see how high it could go, how low, and I was just really getting a feel for what a piano was all about. So even at age 5, I was somewhat interested in creating the music that I used to hear when I was even younger, listening to it on records. Then at about age 8, my cousin brought over a record that would change my life forever, one of them. It was Kiss Alive, and I talked about this in other videos. So he and I would listen to it. It was like my comic book. I would look at the cover. I would look at other albums too by Kiss and try to draw them. I always tried to draw their logo. So I was really excited about the idea of a rock band and having these rock stars and hearing their music and all that. And so we would pretend to play in my living room. So I'd maybe play air drums sometimes, and he would play guitar and jump off the couch. And we were just crazy, but we wanted to pretend we were in Kiss. And if we weren't doing that, we were drawing pictures of them on stage. So we were both super Kiss obsessed. That's kind of why I was so excited to do that Bruce Kulick video recently. It was like one of my last artist series that I did, and to actually have him see it. And then he wrote me an email saying that he really enjoyed it. So that's kind of why I was so excited about doing that video. So I thought I'd throw that in there. At age 9, my dad knew I liked music, and he was always tapping on things, I remember. So one day he just taught me how to do Wipeout with my hands. He used to use his knuckles like on the table, but he taught me to go like that. It wasn't that fast at the time, but I remember I just kept practicing it. And I honestly think that's one of the reasons why I feel like I have a decent sense of rhythm, because when I was that young, I started trying to play these more complex patterns with my hands. And I got obsessed, just like I am today. I just couldn't go to bed until I was able to do it at least 4 times perfect, for example. So my grandma knew about my cousin's obsession with Kiss and my obsession with Kiss and music in general. So one summer, I remember, she brought over all these instruments to my house and put it in the garage. So we had a drum set, 2 guitar amps, 2 guitars, an organ, one of these organs that you turn on and you hear a fan going, and it's like, burr, burr. It was really, really crazy. But it was so amazing to have this in our garage. So every day we would go in and mess with things. Sometimes we didn't get together and play together. Like sometimes I would just go in the garage and pick up the guitar, and it was really interesting to me. I remember trying to figure out some simple melodies, kind of like what I did on the piano, but on a guitar. And it was out of tune, and I think I tried to figure out So Happy Together by the Turtles. I was like, of course, it took me like an hour to figure that out on the guitar back then. But it got, certain things started, the curiosity about this thing called a guitar, and I was hitting drums and playing the organ, and it was just kind of a fun way to dabble into it at first. And then, yeah, my cousin and I would get together, I would try to drum. I didn't really know any beats, but I would do Wipeout, and I would do whatever I knew. and he would play the guitar. I think he knew a couple chords, and he was a good front man. I remember he would run around like Paul Stanley. And my sister was there too, and she wanted to be part of it. But it was kind of sad because I don't think one of the amps worked, but she would hold a guitar and we would never plug her in because we said, "Oh, you're the bass player," even though we didn't know what bass was. And we're like, "You don't hear the bass anyway, so it doesn't matter that you're not plugged in." So it was basically my cousin and I playing, and my sister standing there, just pretending to play a bass, which was actually a guitar. And it was kind of sad because my memory's foggy, but after that summer, I don't remember the instruments being there anymore. I don't know if my dad needed room in the garage to work on cars, but just like that, suddenly the instruments were gone. But my sister began taking orchestra class in school. She was in sixth grade and I was in fifth, so I wasn't old enough to do orchestra yet. But she would bring her violin home and leave it sitting on her bed, and whenever she wasn't using it, I would go in and I would actually try to play it. I remember doing a lot of like pizzicato with my fingers, so I was interested in the strings sounding kind of plucky. I didn't really care for the bow so much. It just seemed to make screechy sounds. That's all I could do. But it was funny because it got me good enough to the next year make orchestra and actually be one of the first chairs. So it was kind of cool the first year being an orchestra, being able to, just play some simple things, but well enough to have my teacher consider me decent enough to put me at first chair. So I thought that was kind of cool. First chair in sixth grade is nothing to be that proud of, but at the time it felt like a big deal to me because I was learning how to read music. I was with other musicians and we were putting on performances. Okay, then the age that changed everything. Right when I turned 13, my cousin Jeff came over. My cousins are a huge reason, by the way, that I can do what I do today. Because my cousin Jeff came over with And Justice for All on cassette. And he played it, and it sounded really crazy. I thought it was cool, but I really didn't get totally into it at the moment. But then I saw the one video by Metallica, and that blew my mind because I saw them playing, it's black and white, and they show parts of that crazy movie where the guy has no arms or legs, and it just really intrigued me, kind of like Kiss did the first time I heard them. Suddenly I wanted to be Lars Ulrich, because in the video they show an overhead shot, he's got this awesome drum set, he's hitting things, and he's doing double bass, and I just felt this energy every time I watched that video. So I got obsessed with drums, and I would take ice cream buckets, because by then the drum set was gone, like I said. And I put ice cream buckets on my bed. It's kind of the old classic story from old people. They always talk about the ice cream buckets. And I took chopsticks because my mom's Korean. We had chopsticks. Even though I don't eat with chopsticks, I would drum with them. Ironically, I suck at using chopsticks to eat. But I would hit them and make beats out of it. And remember, I would play the tape, had Kiss, Smashes, Thrashes, and Hits. I would play along to that. I'm this kid playing along to a song called Let's Put the X in Sex. I thought that was funny. So I would play, and then I would try to drum Metallica, but I didn't have any, way to use my feet for anything, because there were no kick drum or anything like that. So I would just get better with my hands at the time. And that Christmas, my dad bought me a little Casio keyboard, and I hung it up on the side of my wall, and I would start to figure out TV themes and video game themes. So a lot of musical stuff was happening at that age. I think my grandma felt bad for me for hitting ice cream buckets, so she bought me this starter aluminum kit. And it was, kind of inexpensive, but at the time it was exactly what I needed. It was a step above the ice cream buckets. So I set it up in my room, and I didn't have any cymbal holders, but I had a few old cymbals, and I would just use lamps. I took an old lamp, and instead of the lampshade, I put the cymbal on it. And then I had like a music stand, a wire one, aluminum one, and I just used that as a stand somehow. And then I sat on an end table thing because I didn't have a chair, like a drum throne or anything like that. And I would just play, and it actually had a kick pedal, so I was able to kind of do this coordination thing, the basic movements of a drummer. And I got the feel for that. And it was perfect timing because my best friend began taking guitar lessons. So he had this cream color Squier Fender guitar and a little amp. And he was learning like Rocky Like a Hurricane, Iron Man. I remember he learned Red Hot by Motley Crue. It was really cool. And it was one of those things where I was already excited about music, and here we are making it. I'm on drums, he's on guitar. We sound terrible together, but it was a good reason to get together and jam and actually start to create music. So it was a good feeling. And it was fun because we thought of a band name, we thought of Steel Rage. We thought that was so cool, made the sign and everything. And later that got changed to Assault and Battery, and we had a sign for that too. Someone painted it for us or whatever. So that was fun because we really felt like we were starting something. And even though it was just the two of us, we were making noise. It wasn't exactly music yet, but it started to resemble it. And I remember I had a couple posters on the wall of Iron Maiden, for example. We had the Somewhere in Time poster, and I've never heard the song before. It's not like today with the internet where I could just type it in and hear it. So I would sit there on drums and I would make up a song called Somewhere in Time. And I still remember how it goes actually in my head, and I would drum it. And I think that started me off on a creative path. So even though I had no idea what these songs sounded like, I had to imagine what I thought they sounded like. And by the way, it sounds nothing like how it really sounds. But it got my brain in that mode of, hey, I can create things too. So get this, it's so weird how everything just came together, the perfect storm. My brother ends up buying a huge PV amp. It's probably almost up to my chest. And it's supposed to be a PA speaker system, but the guy told him it was a guitar amp. And a really cheap Harmony guitar. It was like a Les Paul knockoff, probably worth $50 at the time. But my brother bought both of them for $150. I still wish I had that PV, actually, that amp. And what's cool about it is he played it a little bit, and kind of like my sister, they sort of drifted off on other things, and I kind of swooped in and grabbed the guitar, and I started to learn real basic stuff that my friend taught me, power chords, how to play the beginning of one, and stuff like that. And so I got really into guitar, and my brother would yell at me because it was his stuff. So eventually, to get him to stop yelling at me, I ended up, I think, paying him $50, and suddenly he said, all right, I don't use it anyway, here you go. So I had my first amp and my first guitar from my brother. So instead of my friend and I jamming drums and guitar, now it was guitar and guitar. And it was funny because my amp was so big, because it's not really a guitar amp, and he had his little square sitting on top. It was just this funny mismatch, but his sounded way better because he had distortion, and I didn't have distortion. So I literally had to do the old take a knife, or a, what was it, razor blade, and cut the speaker to make it have a little bit of overdrive, and you'd have to turn it up kind of loud. So I really came from that old school, didn't have any effect pedals for a while. I had to literally cut the speaker just to get any distortion out of the amp. So I just remember that, just as I was saying that. It's so weird. Eventually I did get my first pedal. It was the Boss Heavy Metal pedal, and that was a great day for me. And this is about the time that I started taking private lessons, and I began learning the ins and outs of guitar and music from my guitar teacher, Eric, who I still know today. Super cool. And some of the most important things that I do today come from his lessons. I remember learning the 3-note per string scales, and I really wanted to shred. I remember he had a 7-string Ibanez, and I would just drool at that thing all the time. I loved it. But he taught me a lot of the beginning mechanics to my shredding abilities today, so I owe a lot to him. And yeah, so that was a good time learning officially what I was trying to do at the time. Because up until then, I was self-taught, and was able to get a lot done. But when I finally went to a teacher, suddenly things were clicking like they never were before. So it was a good thing to do. And then I just continued my guitar education on from there. So my friend and I would put on shows. My friend's name's Al, by the way, and we ended up being in bands together for many, many years. But when we first started, it was kind of funny because we would play in my basement where my room was. I got half the basement from my bedroom. It was perfect for that age. And we would put on concerts, and we would buy cheap lights from Radio Shack. I don't know if you guys know what that place is, but we would buy black lights, which were such a big deal at the time, and any lights we can get a hold of just to make like a stage setup. So I guess I was kind of into stage lighting back then, even though it was bedroom lighting. And we would shut the other lights off, the regular lights, and put on a concert. We'd have little chairs on the other side, and we put like tickets and name tags on them. So our family would come in and watch us play. And even though we were terrible, you know, we would just play parts of songs. So we would go from like Megadeth in My Darkest Hour, just the intro, to Blitzkrieg by Metallica. There was no rhyme or reason to it. We were just kind of playing medleys. And I don't know, people would cheer at or clap afterwards, and we just felt this sense of accomplishment, like we really did something. So we weren't happy just stopping there. So we eventually found a bass player through junior high school, and our friend named Corey. And we were just happy because he had a bass and he had an amp, and he was willing to come over and jam with us. And we jammed with a bunch of other people too, but they were all guitar players or singers that weren't so good. So we eventually knew we just had to get a bass player. So once we had Corey, we had our little 3-piece group, and we were able to play, but we were still missing a drummer. So here's the funny part. The drummer ended up being a kid. It's funny calling him a kid now. Back then, a kid who used to pick on our bass player, Corey. They were kind of enemies in junior high. And it was funny that he ended up being the only guy we knew that had a giant drum set that could play, and that he actually had a nice house. His parents were well off. So we were able to go to his house, and we kind of did a tryout with him. And then we eventually had him in the band, and we had a practice space because of that. And we had a place to go, and we had a drummer with a big drum set that could play Metallica songs. And it felt so good, finally, all 4 of us in a room playing the music we loved together. So the band came around at the perfect time because in junior high, it's such a terrible time for a lot of kids. We were just feeling really low on the totem pole. You know, you had the popular kids, then you had like the preps kind of in the middle, then you had the freaks and the nerds, and that was us. And so because we had this band and we were forming something, I really didn't care about that anymore, about being not popular or being picked on or whatever, because we felt like we were working on something bigger and that we had something to go home to, kind of like our own secret club. It felt great. So this could be a whole nother video, but from about age 15 all the way to 21, I was in that band and we got really far. You know, we worked really hard. I made a video about how we practiced every day during one particular summer and went from the basement to playing First Avenue. And we ended up doing small tours. We got on a local label. I don't know, we got on the radio. We just did a whole bunch of really cool stuff. And I will always look back at that as probably some of the best times of my life. And I learned so much from just being in that group for that long with 3 great friends. So within that time, I began my teaching career. So I would have just 1 or 2 people a week. I think I got up to 3, and they would come over to my house. And then I would teach them either in my basement or my garage. It just depended on the week. And it was very informal, but I started to learn what it took to teach guitar. And I was super flaky. I remember one time a student came over and I was nowhere to be found. We didn't have cell phones back there or anything like that. And the next week, you know, his dad was kind of upset at me, and I started to learn, okay, I can't do that. I started to learn what it was to be a little bit of a responsible teacher. And so that's how I started off, just 3 people a week teaching from my house. And even though I wasn't the greatest guitar player at the time, I knew enough to be able to at least teach up to a certain level. And towards the end of the metal band run, my drummer and my best friend, Christopher, he actually started getting into recording. So he started buying studio equipment, set up a studio in his basement, and I would go over there and I would start to mess with things. He had the old reel-to-reel recorder set up, and so it was real old school, but I learned from him as he was learning. So I kind of piggybacked off of his knowledge. And it was really cool to see him go from that beginning in his basement with a reel-to-reel and a cassette mastering deck to what he's doing now, which is full-out professional studio engineer, owner, and instructor as well. This is also around the time I started working at what I thought was my dream job. It was a local music store in a mall. And so during the breaks, we would just walk around the mall. It was fun. But when we worked, we would sell things like trumpets and violins. So it wasn't the perfect setup for me. But what was cool was in the back room, there was a teaching room. And there was a guy there named Rick. And he would teach, and I would hear like Metallica riffs coming out of the back room. I thought, this is really cool. I think eventually I should be able to teach here. So I asked my boss, and he said, yeah, you can actually start teaching if you have some students. So that all started up. But just as it began going, as the wheels started turning, they found out that they had to close the store. So that store went away, and with it, my dream of starting to teach at a music store. So this is probably the worst time of my life when that all went away. And then I quit my band shortly after just because I felt like it ran its course and I just wanted to try something on my own for a while. And my girlfriend broke up with me and I couldn't find a job. So I ended up working overnights at a gas station, which is a whole nother topic on its own. I'll get into someday. And I always walked around with this dark feeling inside, like the pit of my stomach always ached. And I always felt like I was on the verge of just breaking down. It was really a sad time for me. And also I started delivering newspapers. So I went from the gas station overnights to delivering newspapers every night. It was just a dark time. And so I would think of that as probably the lowest point. And I ended up staying at that low point for quite a long time. And I remember it taught me so much. Just because I felt so terrible, I had to find ways to get out of that feeling. Okay, so picture this. I'm at the very bottom, right? Just kind of stewing in it for months and months. It felt like years, but when you're really depressed, time goes really slow. And I just thought, I need a way out of this. So I kept recording, I kept writing music. Guitar was really the only thing that was like keeping me afloat because I could look forward to actually just, at least I had the guitar. So that was good. And I still had my few students that I was teaching every week. So one night I was delivering newspapers. I just sort of had a breakdown and I knew I couldn't do that anymore. So that night I wrote a letter to my boss. We didn't have email yet. And I just quit right on the spot. I left the key, I walked out, and I said, I don't care if I don't have a job. I don't care if I go hungry. I'm just going to have to quit. So I quit, and a few days later, I decided, like I said, a leap of faith. I just applied at this other music store that was known for not hiring anybody new. You had to know somebody to get in. It was one of those deals. And so I just went in because I'm like, I have no other choice. You know, what do I have to lose? And so I went in, and to my surprise, they hired me. And I was a floor guy, so I would sell violins once again and trumpets. I was totally fine with that. But what was really cool about this place is it was a warehouse for all their other stores. So they had a ton of different kinds of instruments that I hadn't seen before, pianos, different kinds of guitars, basses, drum sets. And there was a big teaching area. So they had a bunch of rooms for teaching. And I always thought, someday I want to teach here. That's a good goal. And even though I worked the floor for a long time, I eventually got my chance to teach. And that's when the office lady gave me a break and she's like, you know what? You seem like a good guy. I know you can play guitar. Why don't you see if you can get a few students and then you can have one of the rooms? So it was cool because I started off with about 5 students a week and I built that up, I think, in a few months to, no, it was probably about 6 months, to 50 students. And so having 50 students every week was such a huge challenge, and I learned so much the first couple of years of doing that. But in that time, I was there for about 10 years, teaching from 50 to 60 students each week. Such a huge learning experience. I could not trade it for I would never trade it for anything because I learned so much in that time. And I remember during that time, I had friends that were in other bands and they started to contact me because they knew I wasn't in a band at the time. And I got invited to play with different types of bands. I ended up joining a country band. So I went from a metal band playing Metallica and originals to country. All of a sudden I'm playing Garth Brooks. It was really weird. But I played some dive bars. I learned a lot from doing that too. And then other bands that I was in did pretty well. You know, I ended up playing everything from, like I said, dive bars all the way up to stadiums. A huge spectrum of opportunities that came my way when I started playing in bands again. So that's probably another podcast or something to talk about all those live experiences, but I'm very grateful for all the opportunities to play live all these years. I always have this feeling like I want to continue to grow. So even though I was teaching 60 students a week and feeling good about it, teaching private lessons, I wanted to reach out even more, but I didn't know how to do it. The technology was not where it is today, not even close. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have half the stuff we have today. So what was crazy was I just started to try to write a method book. I could use Adobe Illustrator, so I would make my pages, somehow got it all together, made copies at a copy store, Kinko's, and made my own books. So my next idea was to make videos like I do today, but we only had these crude cameras, and I would set it up and I would teach, and then I had nowhere to upload it to. So I would create DVDs, and I thought, oh, I'll just make DVDs and sell them somehow. That never happened, so that stopped short. And so I had the will, I just didn't have the means or the way to reach anybody at the time. So still cultivating my teaching methods, even back then under very crude conditions. And so after about 11 years teaching at that music store, I decided to try and go off on my own. It was a big risk because I didn't know how many of my students would follow me over. And so I started a space nearby, and most of them came over, which is a huge relief. And so I kept around 50 students, 55 students, I would say, for the next 13 years now. So I've been very fortunate because I had to take a lot of leaps of faith, but each time I did, it somehow worked out. During that time, I think 2010, I started my first YouTube channel, and it was no big deal. It had a different name, and I would actually just take student videos and I would upload them and, you know, show people what we were learning and working on. And so that was just the beginnings of the art of guitar. It wasn't called that, like I said. It was just a video here, a video there of just goofy things. And then one day a friend of mine said, hey, did you ever think of just shooting videos, like lesson videos? And I told him that I had already tried it. It didn't really work out. But he said, you know what, I'm going to set up some cameras. Let's see if we can make a go at it. So we started off together as partners, and we did a handful of videos. We uploaded them to YouTube. A few of them got a lot of hits. So it was really cool to get that started. And then eventually it just kind of stalled out. I realized that in order for me to do my best, I have to be able to do things on my own. I'm just that way. And so if I get an idea at 2 a.m, I want to be able to just come here and film it for you guys. So I decided to break off on my own. It's kind of a pattern in my life, it seems like. Broke off on my own. And then that was weird because once I did that, I felt like this weird freedom, and suddenly ideas started coming to me, like inspirations. So that was about 2016. And then in 2017, I started Art of Guitar officially. And I uploaded a video called David Gilmour's Top Techniques, because I had this inspiration to do an artist series. And that really kicked everything off. After that, I had a few videos that hit pretty big, got in the millions of views, and then those snowball affected all the other videos. So then from there, it was just this, like I said, snowball effect that kept growing and growing until today, where we're almost at half a million subscribers, and we just passed 53 million views, lifetime views. So when I saw that number, I kind of had to like pause for a second and just remember all the steps it took to get to where I am today, and feeling really grateful for all of it. So it's just so weird because sometimes you only focus on what's happening now or what you want to happen in the future, and you forget all the steps it took to get you to where you're at. So that was sort of a side effect of doing this video, was having to think back to all the steps that it took to get to here and remember how many things had to go a certain way for this all to work out. Because there were plenty of times where it could have just derailed. So it's pretty amazing how everything eventually came together, and now I'm doing what I love. So I won't go too much into the future of what I want to do, because really I'm loving every second of what I'm doing right now. But I guess I would say to continue doing what I do, just reaching more and more people. It's always great to get new subscribers, new people seeing the videos, and as well as coming out with inspired ideas for everybody that are currently subscribed. Sometimes people make a comment like, man, it seems like you're gonna have to run out of ideas eventually, because you're putting out a video almost every day now. But then if you think about all the things I've been through in my life, all the private lessons, all the concerts, all the music I've learned and played, I don't think it could ever run out, because it's just this huge well of information that I keep drawing from. And ever since I started Art of Guitar, the inspirations just keep coming to me. So as far as I'm concerned, there's no end in sight. So yeah, that's pretty much my story. It went a little bit longer than I wanted it to, but hopefully that can inspire people. If you're ever at your darkest times, or even if you're, just starting out or whatever, hopefully some of the stories you hear in the comment section or from what I was saying can help you get through those times, all right? So even if you just started guitar and you have something to say about it, you have some story you want to tell about how you got started, totally fine. Put it in the comment section. If you have been playing all your life and you have a huge long story to tell, go ahead and let us know about it. That's going to be awesome. All right, everyone, thanks for listening to my story. Like I said, I'll do a more elaborate version of it on a podcast somewhere in the future probably, but that's a brief version of it for today. Okay, everyone, I can't wait to read your stories. We'll see you at the next lesson. Thanks. Bye.